Greetings everybody, and welcome to 2021's Halloween in July. This summer we're going to hide inside from all the terrors of reality with terrors of video games. And to celebrate this summer of constant terror, we have another special greeting card for all new patrons. That's right, any new patron who pledges $5 or more during the month of July will get a special greeting card of yours truly and the saucy boy for the summer of constant terror. Not quite ready for the benefits of the $5 tier? Well, fret not, because I've slashed the yearly rates of all the yearly patron memberships as low as they'll go so that anyone can get in on the summer of constant terror. We've got all kinds of spookies this month. We've got classic spookies, Lovecraftian spookies, artsy spookies. We might even be taking a trip down to the Foundation in the search of distractions. I'm also pleased to announce that we have a new tier in the Patreon, the Sauce Lords. Sauce Lords get all of the benefits in the previous tiers, plus extra special benefits befitting their title. Sauce Lords will get VIP access to the weekly game nights, a special role in the Discord above all the other patrons, and the ability to directly submit your own video ideas to me to be voted on by the rest of the patrons, or if I think it's really cool, I'll just do the video outright. So join me as we continue the tradition of Halloween in July. So the first game of Halloween in July 2021 is a game that's possibly the most requested game I've had ever. Seriously, during Indieween last year, I got several dozen messages asking if I had played it or not and if I was going to make a video about it. Well, here it is folks. Sorry to keep you all waiting for so long. So what is Darkwood? Well, it's an indie horror game that first came onto the scene in early 2013 with a trailer, an Indiegogo page, and an application to get onto Steam Greenlight, which for those of you that don't remember, back in ye olden times before you were allowed to put just about anything on Steam, you had to submit an application of sorts showing your project on a now defunct part of Steam called Steam Greenlight, and then if enough people looked at your page and said they'd be interested in buying it, Steam would allow you to sell your game on the storefront. It used to be a huge deal if your game got greenlit, but then Steam went and just let anyone put their game up as early access became more of an acceptable thing, and eventually Steam Greenlight was phased out entirely and replaced with the early access system where devs could just pay an initial fee to get onto Steam. History lesson out of the way, Darkwood not only reached its Indiegogo goals, but also got greenlit and the alpha version of the game was released mid-2014, with version 1.0 coming out on August 17, 2017. They kept adding stuff after release though, with the most recent patch of Darkwood going live in late 2019. Darkwood's gathered a dedicated following since it first hit the scene that's held strong over the years if my inbox is anything to go by. So mechanically, Darkwood is a top-down survival horror game set in a closed-off world. The gist of it is that the forests in Poland are getting weird and weird stuff is starting to happen to people in the woods. But that's nothing new in the world of video games. The woods out in Poland though are getting a lot nastier than what the Sahara Corp was doing out in Canada's backwoods. Okay, now that I think of it, between this, Parapedia, and whatever the hell's been going on at CDPR the last few years, are you guys okay in Poland? Rotate the cow once in the other direction if you need help. We're very good at helping people.
Especially if we find out that there's oil involved.
Hey, wait, what were we talking about just now? Right. We're out in the spooky woods again, and we can't get out. You start the game with a prologue tutorial that has you playing as some nut who kidnaps the protagonist, and then loses it when the protagonist tells him that there's no way out of the woods anymore. You wax the local madman as the protagonist, and then you wake up in the starting area of the game. Welcome to the woods. Just about everything here wants to kill you, and the Wolfman has broken into your house to make fun of you. Your activities will split up into 3 major categories: exploring and surviving the horrors of the woods, crafting stuff to make it easier to survive the woods and advance the plot, and trying to survive the night by any means possible. The first part is simple enough. As long as you don't get too bold anywhere, you'll be able to explore each region of the woods and eventually bootleg Shrek's swamp bit by bit until you've got a decent lay of the land. By the way, don't bother looking for maps, it's procedurally generated every time. There's stuff you'll need to do that will advance the plot and hopefully get you the heck out of these woods, but if you want to get far with doing any of that, you're going to need to craft some stuff. Crafting is done at the workbenches in the safe areas you'll be spending the night in, and if you want to make the good stuff, you're going to need to find or barter for tools to upgrade your workbench. Don't get too bent out of shape though. Upgrades carry over across all workbenches in-game because video game. There's a few things that you won't need a workbench for, such as very basic medical supplies or a rinky-dink torch, but anything as complicated as a 2x4 with some nails going through it is going to require a proper place for you to tinker. You can get resources by scavenging in the woods or trading it with all the people that mysteriously show up in your house every morning. Since there's no real fiat currency in the Oogie Boogie woods, you're gonna be bartering for goods with reputation you've earned among each of the traders that B&E their way into your living room. You'll get a set amount of reputation every morning if you survive the night, and any rep that you don't spend carries over to the next visit. The catch here is that reputation is not universal among all traders like the workbenches are, so think twice before you sell a bunch of stuff to one person if you know you're going to need to buy an expensive thing from another. Then there's surviving the nights. Board up the windows, barricade the doors, and set a crap load of bear traps, because as soon as night falls, everything that goes bump in the night wants to give you a stern talking to about keeping your lights on. You can only hide out in specific buildings that have ovens, which let you pump some sort of gas through the house to keep the monsters at bay. Don't ask questions, just board up the windows. You also need to keep the lights on and stay in well-lit areas so that the especially nasty stuff doesn't come in knocking, and that requires fuel for the generators, which is never in a convenient place. You'll also need to manage that fuel between your generator and the table saw each hideout has if you want to have enough usable wood to properly barricade your doors and windows at night. Luckily for you, fuel is pretty cheap among the traders and practically grows out of the ground, kind of like it's
Oil or something.
I can't take it anymore. I need to distribute the freedom! Okay, cooking time. As all of you in the Freedom Zone know, we're about to have our big Freedom Day tomorrow, which will include explosions, grilling things, and most importantly, deep frying things that normally wouldn't be deep fried in order to scare away those who would try and tell us about the metric system. We're gonna do some deep fried Oreos today because I was at the store and I saw they had the ones with extra freedom in stock. First order of business is to get your batter ready. I'm using this recipe from allrecipes.com, which is literally the first thing that comes up when you Google Deep Fried Oreos recipes. Shout out to All Recipes for not having 20 pages of boring blog posts before their recipes. This batter is going to be 1 cup of milk, 2 tablespoons of oil, 1 cracked egg, and 1 cup of pancake batter mix. Whisk everything together until it's evenly distributed and there's no clumps. Okay, frying time. We're gonna use this corn oil I got here because it's oil made out of corn, which is used exclusively to make unhealthy foods even unhealthier, making it possibly the most American thing in existence. It's a pretty good idea to have everything you could possibly need set up how you need it set up before you so much as light the stove, including a paper towel lined rack to drain your deep fried Oreos on when they come out. We're using oil at a high temperature here, so we gotta be careful. An oopsie here is an ow, ooh, ouchie, I brushed my hand against the edge of the stove and my finger's gonna be a little red for a day. This is a guaranteed trip to the burn ward and possible permanent scarring and disfigurement for life level of oopsie whoopsie, so we're having exactly none of that. Go get an adult. If you're an adult, go get an adultier adult. If you are the adultier adult, have a brief moment of existential sadness as you realize that you have no idea what you're doing in this world despite so many looking to you for direction and guidance, and that those who you look to for advice likely were in the same situation, meaning that no one truly knows what they're doing in this world. We're just existing. And then go get someone with experience using frying oil. Now while we're waiting for this oil to get up to between 350 and 380 units of freedom, let's go over the rules of deep frying. First rule of the fryer: if the stove is lit, you do not take your eyes off it and you watch that temp like a hawk. Second rule: get everything that could possibly bump or disturb the oil out of the kitchen, including pets, small children, and stupid adults. Rule 3: never break the surface tension of the oil. When you put stuff in, lay it down away from you, or preferably use a utensil to slowly lower it in. Okay, it's action time. Take your Oreos, give them a good dunk in that batter you made, and carefully lower those suckers into the oil. These are gonna cook fast, like maybe 1 minute tops for each side before it's time to pull them out. Do these in batches of 5 or so, and stop to take a look at your first batch before you're readying up the second one, as it's a good test to see if you need to tweak anything. As you can see here, my first batch was lame because the batter was too thin, so it didn't properly fry up. We want it to be nice and puffy and have a little bit of that softness between the Oreo and the exterior. So I just added some more pancake mix, gave the batter a good whisking, and look at that. The next batch is getting the results we want. Go through the rest of your Oreos, carefully putting them in the oil and turning them before using a kitchen spider to fish them out, as we don't want any of the uncooked batter that's on our tongs to get onto the finished product, as that batter has raw egg in it. After a few minutes in the paper towels, these bad boys should be just about ready to go. Resist the urge to immediately put the powdered sugar on them, as if you try to sift on that powdered sugar right now before the Oreos cool down, it's gonna melt and get all icky. Give them a good 10 minutes out of the fryer before you bite into them, unless you want to burn yourself. Congratulations, you have tasted freedom. One last thing before we go. Even after the flame is off, do not take your eyes off that oil until it's well under 200 degrees of freedom, and then cover it, put it in the back corner of the stove where it isn't likely to be bumped, and then when it finally gets down to room temperature after probably like 4 or 5 hours or so, dispose of it in a safe container which you will throw away into the trash. Do not pour oil down the drain. That'll do it for now. I think I got all this freedom out of my system. Let's get back to them spookies. And you can also drag stuff around to help barricade yourself in, including light fixtures, so that the spookies can't get you in the dark. Monsters can and will break down your barricades, and the doors you barricaded, and all the stuff you put in front of them. But don't worry, you'll be able to rebuild and rebarricade everything short of massive holes in the walls that were there when you got there using scrap metal and wood. You don't even have to wait till morning to do this if you're in a bad bind. Just put it all back together between intruders. On top of the usual stuff that's going to come after you, there are special events that make things a whole lot worse. These range from a banshee deciding it's a cool idea to make a nest in one of the rooms in your house, randos sneaking around your house, a freak earthquake knocking out your power and leaving you in total darkness, or getting invited to a wedding. So how do you make things a little easier as the nights go by? Well, you level up, of course. Leveling up isn't done the traditional sense of kill things, complete quests, get EXP, but instead you've got to find various items that can be refined into something called essence at the ovens in your hideouts to incentivize you hanging around in tougher spots. Refining things at ovens in harder areas will yield more essence you need to level up for the same items. The things you need to refine into essence are things like mushrooms, certain kinds of meat, and other scavenged items, so while you can in a roundabout way gain experience from killing certain monsters that drop items, it's very inefficient and you're better off just scavenging for mushrooms or trading for refinable items as opposed to picking fights with the large dogs, especially since you won't have a decent weapon for quite a while and you'll go down in a couple of hits. The act of leveling up itself is not so straightforward. You don't really get any straightforward stat upgrades save for a vitality boost later in the game, but instead you get to pick a perk out of a few, some of which will be very helpful, some of which are useless. You also have to pick a debuff every time you level up as a side effect of consuming the essence, which makes the game even harder than it was before, but all of these debuffs are fairly manageable and you can adjust your playstyle to get around them fairly easily. Let's take a quick breather before we go any further to give some love to our sponsor, Acheron. Acheron's a tabletop RPG and friend of the channel that's set in its own dark world based on the likes of Lovecraft and the SCP Foundation. Acheron features unique races to play as in its spooky world and that classless system some of you keep going on about in my Discord. Acheron prefers a free-form progression system where you won't be held back by silly things like what type of character you rolled, but instead you have the freedom to spec into things as you see fit. This makes perfect sense to me as there's no reason to ever bring the musician you met at a tavern into a goblin-infested dungeon. What's he gonna do? Sell merch at them to death? Check out the link in the description below to check out Acheron and pre-order the PDF version or get yourself that fancy hardcover edition. Either way, both come with access to the beta so you can check it out as soon as you check out and get rolling today. So I talked about this a bit in the gameplay portion, but let's circle back to how Darkwood uses the top-down angle as a means of conveying horror and unease. For starters, you can never see everything around you. You're lucky if you can see everything in front of you. Things like trees, walls, or even larger objects will block your already limited cone of vision and make it especially spooky when you hear something nearby, as that means in order to ascertain what made that noise and where exactly it is, you're likely going to have to get close enough to that thing or you'll already be in an extremely vulnerable position. Or at the very least, that thing is going to become aware of you too. Then there's the matter of exactly how big your cone of vision is. It's not great, but things like torches, flashlights, and lanterns can improve your cone of vision, and the latter can even give you a 360-degree radius of light, but that only helps you with spooky things trying to sneak up behind you. There is a perk you can pick that lets you see all around you once a day, but there's also a debuff you'll have to take which can actively make your cone of vision even worse in certain situations. Then, there's what you'll be looking at with your limited cone of vision. Darkwood is made on Unity, and the best way I can describe the look is if someone made an impossibly high-quality Flash game or a 16-bit top-down experience. It's all shown from the perspective that's clearly designed to limit how much you're able to see of everything, and it's clearly not 3D or pseudo 3D, but it's certainly much more than pixel art or chunky Flash drawings. Regardless of what exactly it might be, Darkwood's art style is good at giving you just enough visual information to let your mind do the rest. The monsters in Darkwood definitely have a things that you were only able to see for maybe half of a second type of vibe out in the corner of your eye, and it's safe to assume that pretty much every living thing that is not you is probably a threat to you in some sort of capacity. Baddies start out as dogs, then larger dogs, then savages who are people who went a little too deep into the woods, and eventually become all body horror stuff like the Deku Tree from Hell. Where Darkwood really shines though is the audio design, and not just the ambient music, which is great and exactly as spooky as it needs to be, but also the overall Foley work. The music is pretty good and manages to strike a balance between helping cue the spooky times or the end thereof, but all the sounds of footsteps, growls, and rustling in the bushes is what really sells the experience. Footsteps, you say? How can those be spooky? Well, it's more about when you hear them as opposed to how they're spaced out. Sometimes when you're holed up for the night, you'll hear someone walking around your house. Okay, it's dark out. Nasty things come out in the dark. Who the hell is stalking around my place at night, and what the heck makes them so nasty that they can walk about freely in the dead of night? You know, I don't think I want to find out. I'm just going to hold as still as possible. There's also the matter of how the protagonist is clearly hallucinating sometimes, and that there's a good chance whatever is or isn't out there isn't even real. You'll find yourself in some pretty surreal sequences during certain parts of the game. Lastly, there's the conversations. NPC interactions is where Darkwood's art style really shines. Anyone who you're able to get close enough to talk to is going to be very unsettling looking, from the literal wolf man who's the first person you talk to the obligatory merchant guy and pretty much everyone else in the woods. Some of them move a little to convey how their body works and how unsettling it is, and some don't move at all, which at times can be even more creepy. Now, while I have been hyping this game up quite a bit, and I know a lot of you have been waiting for this video, I'd be dishonest with all of you if I didn't talk about how Darkwood hasn't really aged well. What do I mean by that? Well, while a lot of the mechanics were fine, albeit a little dated back in 2013, here in 2021, it feels like I'm playing a very ambitious game that had a lot of early 2010s mechanics, and while I did mention it doesn't quite feel like a Flash game in aesthetic, I would be entirely unsurprised if it turns out that Darkwood originally was a Flash game in some conceptual stage before Acid Wizard made the move like many others did away from Flash onto Unity, which in retrospect was a very smart move. The first real calling card of this dated aspect is the whole, "This game is like really hard, bruh," that pops up every time you start the game or load up a save. Look, I know how everyone groans when we gotta bring it up, but there's no bigger, "you know this game was directly affected by Dark Souls hitting the scene when" moment in early 2010s game. Everything was super hard and unforgiving back then, or at least said it was, because that's the super cool thing to do. Of course though, like a lot of games that bring this up, the game is actually surprisingly forgiving in some places and just kind of tedious and grindy in others. When you die, you don't even lose all your items, but just half of them are left out in the woods where you died, and the baddies respawn elsewhere, so you can just go run and get your stuff back. Previous versions of the game had you losing about 2 levels worth of experience, and later on they added hard and even harder modes that have limited respawn and permadeath, but that doesn't change the underlying problems. Darkwood can be very tedious. According to my recordings, an in-game day is about 25 minutes long, give or take a few minutes, as time stops in the morning to let you trade with whoever broke into your house and maybe fix a few things while you're at it. Of that 25 minutes, 6 to 8 of those minutes are going to be you sitting quietly and as still as possible in your fortified hideout, depending on how early you decided to call it a day. Once you figure out that moving as little as possible decreases the attention you get from monsters at night, it becomes basically you just doom scrolling through Twitter and the Instagrams, while occasionally a savage starts banging on your door for a second before they get bored and leave. Eventually, you'll figure out that based on how the overworld is laid out, you can just hang out in your starter hideout every night and not have to deal with too much crap so long as you stay still. I eventually figured out that it's far more cost efficient in the long run to either hang out at the starter base in chapter 1 or to just put all your stuff in storage and let the baddies get you, skipping the nights entirely. While you don't gain reputation overnight if you die, this also means that if you're dead, baddies stop coming after you and they won't break your stuff. While the traders do carry some wooden nails on them, it's almost never enough to fully repair your barricades, set new traps, and what have you, since savages tend to want to break everything in sight, which is going to cost you something more valuable: your time. While wood, nails, and even gasoline are fairly abundant out in the woods, you'll still need to take the time to go out and find them and stock up, and then more time to set up your barricades since you couldn't do it in the morning when time's frozen since you had to go and scrounge up some more nails. This means that while yeah, you do get a lot more rep for sticking it out in harder areas, you have a massive opportunity cost in being able to do literally anything else with the time that you need to go and find more lumber to fix your barricades. And while we're on the tedious nature of Darkwood, let's bring up combat. While I know most of this is by design, when you're forced into combat, it feels really clunky. Enemies seem to be able to effortlessly bop you on the head while you have to wind up, wait, and then let them get into the sweet spot and then let her rip, hoping that they stagger. And if they do stagger, the fight's pretty much over as you stun lock baddies into paste. Guns are there, but they can at times be more trouble than they're worth, and everything's hitbox is really iffy, especially traps. I found that I ended up stepping into my own traps far more than the monsters did. And while I can't confirm this, I think this might have something to do that if you can't see a trap and where the monsters would be walking over it, say the trap is on the other side of the door, it's a dice roll if they actually spring the trap or not. I base this on how occasionally they will spring traps and get stuck in ones that I can't see so that there's one less baddie I have to deal with, or occasionally a baddie breaks in and their HP is already almost gone. However, I took the time to learn where savages and other monsters will go to attack my barricades and place several traps all around the areas they would go so that there was no way they could avoid the trap if they wanted to start breaking down my doors. But then again, night after night, I'd end up losing half of my health pool coming out of my panic room and stepping on a trap that it'd be essentially impossible for some sort of monster not to step on if they were banging on my door like they were last night. Then there's how once you get over the initial spookiness of exploring, traveling becomes a pain. Even with items and skills that increase your sprint time, the protagonist is easily winded, and since stamina also dictates how well you can attack, you're SOL if you try to run and something ends up being directly in your path. And finally, since I've been harping on this for a while, and I don't want to give this game too bad of a beatdown, Darkwood has a bad case of go read the wiki syndrome. Now, a lot of games can be wiki games and still be a lot of fun. Games like Kenshi, The Forest, and Subnautica come to mind. Heck, back in the alpha of Minecraft had a real bad case of go read the wiki syndrome. However, in those games, you can already have a lot of fun, and anything you might learn from the wiki is just icing on the cake or your obsessive need for more answers to lore right this instant. Darkwood falls more into the category of games where unless you read the wiki, you're gonna have a very bad time. Things are poorly explained, progress in certain areas can be blocked by not having a certain item, which if the game does telegraph where to get it, it doesn't do a very good job, and some of the crafting or home defense options are pretty much impossible to figure out organically. I hate to say this, but sometimes Darkwood gives off big, go buy the Prima Games guidebook energy too. I'll fully admit that I scrapped my first playthrough, in part thanks to an emergency reinstall of Windows, taking my save file with it, but also because if you don't know enough of what you're supposed to be doing, you can find yourself stuck in a loop of just barely surviving every night and being unable to make any progress on the main story. Hey everyone. It's Charl from several months later after I paused the production of this video in order to make sure that I didn't fall too far behind on other videos for Halloween in July without sacrificing the quality on this one. As I mentioned a moment ago, I had to format my PC and reinstall Windows due to my PC getting a boo-boo, which made me lose my save file for Darkwood about 2/3 of the way through the game, and therefore I had to start over. I'm gonna add a few things to the video right here because after reviewing what I had previously written and recorded it all tracks, but there's some more stuff I'd like to add now that I've got 1.5 playthroughs under my belt. The first big thing I noticed in my playthroughs is that there is some pretty intense power creep in Darkwood. If anything, Power creep might not be the right phrase, since for power creep, it's like when you've got over 100 hours in your typical Bethesda RPG, and you've explored and grinded enough to where there is nothing the game can throw at you anymore, since even on harder presets, you've gone beyond what the game can reasonably account for. Darkwood is more like a power spike. After you get past Chapter 1 and into the swamp, you find yourself in possession of an absurd amount of resources after a day or so of exploring, and suddenly all the mushrooms and meat you collect will be worth like 10 times of what it was in the last area, which was already a lot more than what it was worth in the area before that. I had maxed out my inventory and hotbar slots at the beginning of the third area in the game, and I hit max level within a couple days of being in the swamp. As I was going through the objectives in the swamp, I was packing 2 long guns, a pistol, enough ammo to take on a small militia by myself, and more healing items and tools than I could possibly use in a single day. The only reason I didn't go and get an assault rifle too was because at that point I already had too many guns to reasonably use and was more focused on completing the game. Surviving the night also went from getting dunked on regularly in the old woods to scrolling on my phone again to only occasionally look up and toss a flare whenever the game decided to kill my base's power. And then every morning when the traders would show up, I'd end up having reputation in the thousands thanks to all the extra stuff I found that I couldn't possibly use at this point, so I just get even more ammo and resources every day, increasing just how untouchable I was. The other thing that sticks out to me and kind of contrasts to this power snowball effect is that if you play the game twice in a relatively short span of time, you'll notice how much Darkwood likes to pad the playtime out. This game pads like the rooms that Lovecraftian protagonists tend to either start out in or end up in by the end of the story. The padding is all around you and you can't escape it. I timed it out, and without any debuffs, you can run for all of 8 seconds outside of an optional once a day stamina boost, and even then when you are running, it's more like a light jog. To make matters worse, the final area of the game is covered in waist deep water that makes your run more like a walk whilst burning through stamina twice as fast, and now your walk is more like an awkward shuffle. If I had to try and guess why this is, aside from getting more hours out of the main story, I'd say that it might be because if you were able to run reasonably fast, or for a decent amount of time, you notice just how small the areas of the woods are pretty quickly. Then there's how a lot of the major quests in the game seem to almost always require an extra day between major steps in order to be finished. Sure, sometimes this will make perfect sense, but most of the time I was thinking to myself, wait, why can't we just do this today? It's not even 10 in the morning. Finally, in what might be the most egregious case of padding, there's no going to an earlier save if you find yourself in a bad spot or accidentally make a wrong story choice that sets you on a path you didn't want to go down. You have to start the game all over again, meaning that you have to sit through all those nights again, you gotta go through all that really slow scavenging in the early game for base materials, and you have to start carefully collecting mushrooms and stuff to level up all over again, rather than just rolling back to a previous save. When we add in the factor that the maps are always randomized every playthrough, that makes it feel more like the randomization is in service of making sure that the playthroughs rack up as many hours as possible, because this game would be an absolute breeze to get through if you knew where everything was right out of the gate. Thanks to this autosave only system, I ended up not being able to get the true ending despite doing everything I needed to do in order to get it thanks to a misclick. I accidentally clicked on the sleep button instead of backing out when I realized I didn't do a single little thing before the end game, and not only could I not back out of the cutscene in game, but the game also hides your cursor once a cutscene starts so that you can't try and back out to menu and change your decision. At this point, I realized it had taken me 23 hours to get here according to my Steam playtime, and I had neither the time nor the willpower to do it all over again for 5 minutes worth of content when taking into consideration how far behind schedule this video already was. With these two things in mind, I wouldn't be surprised that in spite of the unusually long amount of time it takes to complete Darkwood when compared to other horror titles, at some point, Darkwood might have been a sub 10 hour or even a sub 8 hour playthrough, and Acid Wizard maybe felt that they needed to tweak things in order to make it feel like the backers were getting their money's worth. I can't help but notice that in the pre-alpha trailer that came around when the game was being crowdfunded, that the protagonist moves a whole lot faster than what we got in the final version. Additionally, every shelter in the game has an area that was clearly at one point a bedroom, and I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that at one point Acid Wizard was considering letting the player try and sleep through the night was maybe a dice roll for if something tries to attack you, and you could maybe go back to bed once the danger had passed. I could be entirely wrong here, but I couldn't help but think about this since a lot of the other parts of the game are very pad for time-y, and even though time does move faster during the night, according to my recordings, it's still around a third of every day. Plus, in order to get through the night successfully, you have to call it a day at a little before or right at 1600 hours in order to get back to your base in time, start fortifying it by sundown at 1800 hours in order to make sure that you're fortified, in position, and making as little noise as possible by sundown at 2000 or 2000 hours so that you can do mostly nothing nothing until 800 hours. When you take this into consideration, plus optionally considering the time you need to go out of your way to scavenge for wood, fuel, nails, and scrap metal, the night cycle can easily be more than half of your in-game day in Darkwood, and if you were able to just skip that, the game would be radically shorter than it is now. Now, I know that thanks to this addendum, I've been going on for quite a while now saying mean things about some of your guys' little indie darling, but those of you that have been with me for a while now know that I'd rather speak my truth to you guys as opposed to being yet another internet sycophant that tells you sweet little lies to make you feel good, even if that means I'm gonna get throttled for it. A while back, I talked on Twitter about how RE8's playtime wasn't a problem at all because horror games need to be short in order for the player not to get inoculated against its formula for the spookies. Darkwood's long and at times obviously padded out playtime does it zero favors. Games like Amnesia, Outlast, and the older Resident Evil games are all 7 to 8 hours long or much less, and I wouldn't mind it at all if Darkwood was up to an 8-hour game in order to make sure that its creepy aesthetic and slow combat mechanics stayed fresh and tense throughout the entire game instead of how it really felt towards the end in the swamp where I was just playing a top-down action game that had a few more steps involved. Now with all that out of the way, we can talk about the story. What is the woods? Why is the woods? Well, the Darkwood was once a normal wooded area, but then some weird stuff happened and the woods started growing out of control. Like, really out of control. The woods grew so fast that they started to swallow up the roads that lead in and out of the forest, and the edges of the forest grew so thick that you couldn't get out that way either. To make matters worse, now there's some sort of plague spreading around in this part of the woods that no one can really ascertain what it does and how it works, since it's affecting everyone and everything in the woods far too fast to get any studying done. So where do we fit into all this? Well, we're seemingly some rando that a local doctor who you play as during the prologue thinks is a means to get out of the Darkwood, and after we switch over to the protagonist, we get the hell out of the doctor's residence and wake up in one of our safe houses. There we're greeted by the wolf who makes fun of us but also gives us a means to start making our way in the Darkwood. You can go along with the wolf for most of the game, but later on you'll meet the musician who has a different way of going about things. Either path you take will still lead you to trying to get out of the main forest area towards the swamp where you can access the radio tower and hopefully get out of there. Your mileage might vary though, depending on the choices you make. Okay, spoiler time. It turns out you are a part of a team assembled by the Polish military tasked with figuring out what the hell is going on in the Darkwood and trying to help the people in there. Attempts at napalming the woods weren't going well, and blockades ended up being useless since the woods seemed to not want anyone coming in or out, as the trees grew in front of the roads faster than anyone could clear them. You and like one other guy are the only surviving members of the team that are still alive in the Darkwood, and the other guy isn't doing so good. You'll eventually be able to decide between trying to escape the Darkwood, or do you? Or if you want, you can just kill it with fire, which turns out to be something that you can do, provided you hit the right plot beats and know what parts to burn. You eventually meet the being who is behind all this woodsy crap, and if you kill it, the Darkwood and the plague will go with it. Seeing this as a good ending depends on what you did during the game and where your morals lie. You potentially just killed off most of the people living in the woods, but you also stopped the being from expanding its influence beyond the forest and possibly to the entire world. Some theorize that the being was still in an infant stage based on how it looks, and who knows what it would have done given enough time. If I had to call it right this instant, I'd say that Darkwood is certainly a classic, but like many other classics, it's something that you're going to have to be very patient with and willing to look at outside help so that you don't end up screwing yourself over. Darkwood's art style and general aesthetic are something to behold, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone do woodsy body horror like I've seen it done here. Additionally, at $15, even when it isn't on sale, most of my complaints are swept aside as Darkwood costs less than a trip for two to the movies, which, remember when that was a thing? And you'll definitely get your money's worth out of Darkwood. Up next, we've got an action horror classic, and no, I will not apologize for that description of Dark Corners of the Earth, followed by one of the most prolific freeware horror games ever. Make sure that you're subscribed and hit that stupid bell that makes subscribing do what it's supposed to do, so that you can see all the cool stuff we've got planned for Halloween in July this year. I want to thank all of you for watching, especially to my patrons who make these videos possible. If you'd like to become a patron and fight the good fight against crappy, questionable sponsors, head on over to patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where for the price of some nails and a few slices of bread, you can get early access to videos, 4K cat clips, uncut versions of commentary videos where I cover all the things on a certain topic, and the option to vote on what videos come next. In the meantime, stay safe, stay indoors, wear your mask and practice social distancing when you need to go out, and enjoy this cat video.
Oh goodness, look at you, silly boy. I'm gonna turn on this light. I hope it doesn't blind you. Oh, I'm so sorry.
But I need to get how adorably goofy you're being right now. In good light. Look at all those wobbles. Look at this boy with his big fluffy belly on display. Look at that fluff. It would be so nice to touch it, but I know I'd get murdered. Look at the boy. Look at his little feet. I didn't even do anything. He was just laying around like this. You know, I think it really was a genuinely good idea to get rid of the green screen, because now he just lays out in all his silliness as he leaves, because he doesn't want Daddy Dearest making fun of how he sits. Look at this boy. Look at that thing of frozen chicken sandwiches in the back, because we had to move it to make room for other things. Okay, I'm done bothering you, Fluffle. Thank you for behaving.